In 1957, everything changes for second graders Bryce Lowski and Julie Baker when they meet for the first time. For Julie, it's love at first sight. She feels an instant connection with Bryce and becomes absolutely sure that he's the one for her. Bryce, on the other hand, doesn't feel the same. He's unsure, nervous, and like many boys his age, a bit girl-phobic. The idea of having a girl like Julie constantly following him around embarrasses him, and he tries his best to avoiding Julie is nearly impossible. They live across the street from each other and go to the same school, so for the next 6 years, Bryce feels stuck with her attention, while Julie keeps on liking him more and more. As they enter the 6th grade, Bryce becomes more desperate to keep Julie away. He comes up with a plan to get her off his back for good. He decides to ask out Sherry Stalls, a girl in their class who Julie can't stand. Bryce thinks that dating Sherry will make Julie lose interest in him. At first, his plan works. Julie sees Bryce with Sherry and, feeling hurt, tries to move on from him. For a brief moment, Bryce feels like he's finally free from Julie's attention. However, things don't go as smoothly as Bryce hoped. His best friend, Garrett, starts liking Sherry too. Garrett doesn't know about Bryce's plan and ends up spilling the truth to Sherry. Bryce only asked her out to get rid of Julie. Sherry feels humiliated when she hears this and breaks up with Bryce. Now that Bryce's plan has fallen apart, Julie learns about what happened. With Sherry out of the picture, she goes right. She couldn't stop thinking about him and was always hoping that one day they'd finally be together. So, when Julie found out that Bryce had broken up with Sherry Stalls, the girl she didn't like, 1963, when they were in 7th grade, something new happened. Bryce's grandfather, Chet Duncan, moved in with Bryce's family. Chet wasn't like the others. He noticed Julie right away and saw something special in her that nobody else seemed to understand. He admired how different she was from the other girls her age and thought she was a rare, one-of-a-kind person. Chet kept telling Bryce how special Julie was, hoping that his grandson would start to see it too. But Julie that stood tall in her neighborhood. The tree was her sanctuary, a place that made her feel free and connected to everything around her. She would climb it and spend hours just looking at the world from above. No one really understood why the tree was so important to her, but to Julie, it was everything. Then came the day they decided to cut the tree down. Julie couldn't believe it. The thought of losing the sycamore was unbearable to her. She rushed to the tree, climbed it, and refused to come down, hoping she could save it. For hours, people from the town gathered around, watching her as she clung to the tree. It wasn't until her father, Richard, came and gently talked her down that she finally gave in. The tree was cut down, and Julie was heartbroken. Julie was devastated after losing the sycamore. It felt like a part of her was taken away. But her father knew how much the tree meant to her, and to help her heal, he gave her a painting of the tree. It was a gift that comforted her, and although the tree was gone, the painting helped her hold on to the memory of it. As time went on, Julie started a new project, raising chickens in her backyard. It all began with some chicks from a school project, and soon enough, the chickens started laying eggs. Julie was excited and decided to sell the eggs to her neighbors. But when it came to the Lowski family, she didn't ask for any money. Instead, she gave them the eggs as a kind gesture to show her feelings toward Bryce and his family. She thought it was a nice way to show she cared. However, Julie was heartbroken when she found out what Bryce had been doing with the eggs. Instead of keeping them, Bryce had been throwing the eggs away. It wasn't because he didn't want them, but because his father, Stephen, was afraid of salmonella. This news crushed Julie. She had put her heart into raising the chickens and thought the eggs were a special gift. On top of that, she started feeling embarrassed about the state of her family's yard. Their backyard was messy and neglected, and she feared it might be one of the reasons Bryce didn't seem to care about her gifts. Determined to make things better, Julie decided to clean up the yard and turn it into something she could be proud of. Around the same time, Bryce's grandfather, feeling a connection to Julie, Chet decided to help her with the yard work. Chet admired Julie for her strength and passion, and the more time they spent together, the more he grew fond of her. In fact, she reminded him of his late wife, and this brought a sense of warmth to their growing friendship. One day, Bryce's father, Stephen, started criticizing the Bakers for the poor condition of their yard. He couldn't understand why they didn't take better care of their property. But Chet quickly stood up for Julie and her family. He pointed out that the Bakers were renters, so it wasn't really their responsibility to maintain the yard. On top of that, Chet explained that most of their money went toward caring for Julie's mentally disabled uncle, Daniel, who needed a lot of support. This made Bryce see things differently. He started realizing how much Julie's family had to deal with and why the yard had been left the way it was. As Chet continued spending time with Julie, helping her fix up the yard, he encouraged Bryce to open his mind and think about her in a new way. Bryce's view of Julie began to change, and he found himself liking her more and more. With Chet's encouragement, Bryce started to see Julie for the remarkable girl she was. At the same time, Julie started to change in other ways too. With the encouragement of Bryce's grandfather, Chet, she began to think more deeply about her own feelings. She had always been so sure about Bryce, but now she started questioning whether she really liked him as much as she thought. One day, Julie went with her father to visit her uncle Daniel, who had a mental disability, for his birthday. The visit was tough for Julie, but by the end, it turned into a positive experience. It reminded her of how much her family meant to her, even though life with Uncle Daniel wasn't always easy. Not long after the visit, one of Julie's classmates mentioned to her that Bryce had been admiring her lately. This caught Julie's attention and, for a moment, it gave her hope. However, that hope quickly disappeared when she overheard Bryce talking with his best friend, Garrett. As Garrett made fun of her and her uncle Daniel, Bryce didn't stand up for her. Instead, he went along with Garrett's rude comments, which broke Julie's heart. In that moment, Julie completely lost interest in Bryce. She couldn't believe he would laugh about something so hurtful, especially about her uncle. Meanwhile, Bryce's mother, Patsy, felt bad about how their family had been treating the Bakers, especially after hearing about what Bryce had done. Wanting to make things right, she invited the Bakers over for a family dinner, hoping to smooth things over between the families. Julie finally confronted Bryce. She was angry and told him how much it hurt her when she heard what he said about her uncle. She made it clear that she didn't want to speak to him again, not now, and not ever. During the dinner, Julie and Bryce sit directly across from each other, but Julie avoids talking to him and never even makes eye contact. The tension between them is clear. After the meal he had acted earlier. This apology doesn't sit well with Bryce. In fact, it upsets him. To Bryce, her apology feels like a sign that she no longer cares enough to be angry, which makes him feel even worse. As the annual school basketball auction for charity draws near, Bryce finds out that he's been chosen as one of the basket boys. This means he'll be auctioned off to other students, along with a homemade lunch he'll share with the highest bidder. Soon, Bryce hears that Sherry Stalls is planning to bid on him, along with another one of the school's most popular girls. He starts to wonder what Now, Bryce is nervous. He can't stop thinking about what might happen if Julie does bid for him. But as the auction begins, Bryce watches in surprise as Julie spends all of her money on basket boy number 8, the boy who goes up for bidding just before Bryce. When Bryce's turn comes, Sherry ends up winning him instead. During the basket boy across from Bryce, and though he tries to focus on his lunch with Sherry, he can't stop staring at Julie. Talk to her. Bryce chases after her, but Julie jumps on her bike and pedals as fast as she can, heading home in tears. Bryce doesn't give up and continues to chase her. At the same time, Garrett, Bryce's friend, runs after him. After a heated confrontation between the two, their friendship falls apart, and they go their separate ways. Meanwhile, Julie reaches home, still crying, heartbroken over everything that's happened. Bryce, desperate to make things right, tries again and again to talk to her. He rings her doorbell, calls her house, and even shows up at her bedroom window, but Julie continues to ignore him, wanting nothing to do with him. Then, one day, Julie looks out her window and sees Bryce digging a hole in her front yard. Furious, she demands to know what he's doing, but her father steps in and explains that he gave Bryce permission. Confused and still upset, Julie watches as Bryce continues to dig. After finishing the hole, Bryce leaves without saying a word, leaving Julie even more puzzled. Later, Bryce returns carrying a baby sycamore tree, just like the one Julie had loved so much. He carefully places the tree in the hole he had dug. Seeing this, Julie finally understands what Bryce is trying to do. She steps outside and quietly joins him. Together, they begin planting the tree. As they work side by side, Bryce gently places his hair watching. Do not forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel.